two very simple but very profound reasons. If we don't look into our past, we can't understand today. The only way we make sense of today is to think, well, how did we get into this place? So whether it's something in the church or it's something in society, then we've got to look into the past. Think of the Black Lives Matter protests. If we want to understand racism today, we actually have to understand the history of colonialism. We have to understand the slave trade, but we also have to understand things like the notion that Westerners are automatically superior. So we have to ask ourselves, well, why when we go to other places do we refer to them as the natives? Why don't we refer to ourselves as the visitors? So it's only when we understand the past that we can understand today. And in religion, if we want to look, Christians fight one another. Hey, this is crazy. Why do Christians fight one another? Why do Christians go around spending so much time saying, I don't think you're really a Christian? If you want to understand, if we want to understand our fighting today, then we have to look into the past. So that's the first reason. Would you like a second reason?
Yes, please.
The past shows us forgotten options for the future.
Can you repeat
Think
that?
about it.
Because
the past shows us forgotten options for the future. We did things differently in the past. And we always think that what we did yesterday, we were doing 1,000 years ago, or we were doing in the time of Jesus. But it's only when we go back and we realize, hey, we didn't have to go down that route. There were other options. We did things differently. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there, is the words of the opening lines of a famous novel. But when we go back into the past, we look at other options, and then we realize that because they worked in the past, but we've just forgotten them, they open up things we can do differently tomorrow.
The other question is, when does the past start? Because people say we've always done it like this.
Yeah, but that's always the illusion. The difference between just sitting in a bar talking about the olden days and being a historian is that when you're sitting in the pub, you either remember the nasty bits you want to get away from or the good bits you want to go back to. The historian tries to go back in a systematic way and in an organized way and look at both good and bad, the bits we've remembered and the bits we've forgotten. So history is a discipline. It's not just, when I was a child, the apples were sweeter and the girls were prettier and all that. No, it looks back and says, yeah, the apples may be the same, they may be different. And we might have to remember that very few people could afford apples. So history is a critical discipline, and history raises all sorts of awkward problems. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, today we have people saying, well, you just can't talk about women priests. Why? Because we've never done it. Well, why have we never done it? Because until just a couple of generations ago, no one even thought that a woman could be equal to a man. But once that question has been asked, we have to ask, well, does that mean we have to change all our assumptions about the past? And I'll tell you a funny story. I met a guy recently, and he was very conservative Catholic. He gave out stink to me and told me I'm a dreadful man. And women, the Holy Father has said that women have a different function in life and they mustn't become priests. He was absolutely certain it had never been done. And I knew he had 2 daughters and a son. So I said, well, that's good, because I said, it's very useful for you. You can save money because you don't have to educate your daughters as well as you educate your son. Oh, no. So it was interesting that a generation ago, my uncle said, spending money on the education of a girl is wasted. They'll just go and get married. This man, that's a generation ago, that was 40 years ago that my uncle said that. He gave that piece of advice to my aunt. And yet, today, this very conservative Catholic, who was absolutely certain that it could never change, but when it touched him in the form of the education of his daughters, they were to get the exact same benefits as his son was to get. So that shows you that the whole question of whether women can be ordained or not, well, you can't say the past determines the future because it wasn't even an option in the past. So it may become an option in the future. So that's why historical theology, it may be boring, but it's very important.
But it always depends on a new interpretation. And I know that also from some very orthodox rabbis who try to live exactly how they lived 200 years ago, and you're not allowed to drive in a car to the synagogue, and you can't have anybody else to drive, so you have to live close to the synagogue. So there's a similar issue, but whereas the progressives don't even have a problem with having a woman rabbi, for example. So that's, yes, life changes. And history, I also think that history is made up of many stories of different directions. It's not just one story, but many stories.
And the historian tries to find out the limitations of each story.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why it becomes an academic discipline.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who've just tuned in, you're listening to Muffin Talk with Beate. If you miss any of our programs, please check out www.planetoaudio.org.nz/Muffin Talk, or go to my website at www.studyjoy.nz. My interview guest today is Professor Thomas O'Loughlin, and we've been talking about history and theology. Tom, we have just celebrated the feast of the Transfiguration of the Lord. With your background in historical theology, can you tell us more about the origins of this feast day?
In the Gospel of Mark, we have to think of the Gospel of Mark as a preacher wandering around the Aegean, going from church to church, telling a story of why Jesus is important. And he tells a very elaborate story, which follows a very well-known Jewish story form, which is the wondrous transformation of a great person. So we have visions of Moses, visions of the prophets. And now suddenly he's telling the story of a wondrous vision of Jesus, and Jesus is with the great lawgiver, Moses, and he's with the great prophet, Elijah, and the three of them are together on the great high mountain. And the great high mountain is the symbol of revelation. So to Mark, this story is a story that says, Jesus, whom we are following and whom we know was crucified 40 or 50 years ago, he is equal to Moses and Elijah. He's been put on the highest plane in the memory of the people. And then not only is he being put on the highest plane with Moses and Elijah, he is being given a voice from heaven, a bath coal, the great standard story of revelation within Second Temple Judaism. A voice comes from heaven, and it is, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." So to someone who is very tuned in to the Jewishness of early Christianity. This is everything. This is a story that makes a great deal of sense. And so then this story is then taken up and used by Luke in his story, and it's taken up by Matthew and it's used in his story. So it's a wondrous story that Jesus is equal in terms of revelation to Elijah and Moses, in that the three of them are on the holy mountain, and then a voice from heaven, God acknowledges Jesus as his son and says, listen to him. So to us, it looks like just sort of, the closest we come to this sort of thing is almost science fiction. But to the first followers of Jesus, a story like the Transfiguration is an affirmation of who they believe Jesus to be.
And is it always Elijah and Moses? I thought one story had two angels, isn't
it? No, the angels on the hill appear in a different place. No, in Mark's gospel, it says that he was, and he appeared, and there appeared to them Jesus and his and some of the 12, Elijah and Moses. And then in Matthew's gospel, which is the next stage of the story, and behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah. And then in Luke's telling his story slightly later, his raiment became dazzling white, and there appeared with him Moses and Elijah. Now the angels appear in a different. These wondrous hilltop stories they're very common in Judaism at the time of Jesus, and they're very common in early Christianity.
And so some of our listeners might have seen the pictures of the famous oil painting by Raphael. And Raphael, 1517 or so, he depicted Jesus floating above the ground with a ray of white light around him, and then to his right and left, Moses and Elijah, and Jesus' disciples have fallen into the ground in fear, as you were explaining. When you look at the painting, it seems like it depicts the ascension rather than the transfiguration. Is this how it was understood in the 16th century?
There's a long tradition in the Eastern Church with the icon of the Transfiguration, where they're shown that they're not in our time. They're not in the same tick-tock time that you and I are in at the moment. They're in this wondrous time because they're seen in their wondrous glory. And so Jesus is shown surrounded by a shaped light, and it's almost like a sunburst. And then the Elijah and Moses, they're given smaller sunbursts. And it's that tradition that is coming up with the Renaissance painting. They're no longer painting icons. They're trying to historicize this by putting it into what they imagine as a realistic landscape. And the effect of that is, but they know that this isn't, somehow they know that this isn't just to be treated as a sort of a snapshot. And so that's why they try to show it in this sort of otherworldly way, the floatingness.
I think the Transfiguration must have been very difficult for a painter to depict.
Well, how you can't, the problem with Renaissance painting all the way down to modern photography is that it's based on the idea that if you were there with a sketchbook or with a camera, you could take a photograph of it, or you could sketch it and say it looked like this. But of course, all of these stories are wonder stories. They're to be entered into with the imagination. And you're to say, my heavens, Jesus, who is the one who preaches and who is the one who has been wandering around and gathering a group, he is also the beloved Son of the Father. He is the chosen one. He is the one who you're to enter into this with your mind's eye, not with a camera lens.
And a Bible scholar told me some time ago that the Transfiguration was a historic moment. So what you just said was like a picture, but at the same time it was the moment that Jesus was in close communication with God, and God revealed to him about the reign of God, that it would come. What do you think about it?
We don't know whether it was a historic moment or not, and in fact, that's let's hold on there until you'll have to edit this out.
Yes.
Okay,
the historic moment.
We don't know whether it's a historic moment or not, because we can only know about historical moments insofar as they fit in with our understanding of time and space. But in a way, that's a distracting question. It distracts us from realizing Gospels are not biographies, Gospels are not history. Mark was not trying to write a historical document. He was trying to help a group of disciples grow in their understanding of what it is to follow Jesus. And it's a little bit like asking all these other historical questions. Were there 3 wise men and all that? These are distractions. And so let's not go there. If you were there with your video camera, you would have seen nothing, because this is a matter of trying to understand. And people say, oh, well, then you're not taking it seriously. Well, if you want to take it seriously, you immediately say, well, okay, tell me something about Elijah. Tell me what's the significance of Elijah for Christian faith. Okay, tell me what's the significance of Moses? Tell me something about the Deuteronomic covenant, which is the dominant memory of Moses at the time of Jesus. Priest recently said to me, you've got to look on this as a historical fact. Okay, how much time do you spend preaching about Elijah and Moses? Oh, I don't like preaching Old Testament stuff. So I said, why? Oh, it's out of date. Well, I said, if it's out of date, you're missing the point of the Transfiguration. So the answer is, let's not start chasing. Let's not try to find out, was it on this mountain or that mountain? Or did it happen or didn't happen? These are questions that belong to the world of the detective story. This story belongs to a gospel which is written so that you might believe. And in that case, what this is really saying is, well, what is the significance of Elijah? Why was it important for Jesus to be seen with Elijah? Why was it important for him to be seen with Moses? What's the significance of a voice from heaven? These are the real questions. So the real thing is, spend more time studying the OT. Realize that, for instance, if you're a Catholic and you're at Mass and you hear Old Testament readings, do you listen very carefully, or do you think they're out of date? If you think they're out of date, then this story is out of date, in which case, why worry about it? So there are far more profound questions than the sort of whodunit question.
And when we look at Mass and we have the first reading and the second reading, or we have first reading the Psalm and the second reading, then it's often so similar, the story, that you you can't really understand the New Testament story without having the background of the Old Testament.
It's a good principle that you can give if you read the New Testament without the Old Testament, it's like cut flowers. They'll look lovely for a few days, but then they die. But if you have the New Testament and you see it as part of the larger story that is the Hebrew Bible, then it's like a potted plant. It's got roots, and the flowers just keep coming.
Thank you very much for that explanation. And I think that history really has to do with the roots, and it's good to have a good foundation. And I think it's great that you are contributing to this kind of foundation for every Christian. And I think that in one interview that I saw with you online, you talked about Christian and the name Christian, that it was given by outsiders to the Christians. It was not something that the Christians invented. And I think that you talked about Jesus the Christ as the title.
Yes, and let's just finish on this, because I know the time is moving on. Yes. And that is that the Transfiguration reminds us that the followers of Jesus saw him as a way. And that's why they refer to themselves as the way. Jesus was the one who showed them the way to the Father. And that way had been prepared for them by Moses and the prophets.
That's why you need them.
Yeah, that's why you need them.
And isn't it also that there are two witnesses? That reminds me also of Matthew usually has two people.
Well, in both, wherever you have witness stories, stories will invariably try to have many people. And so, for instance, in the three Transfiguration accounts, in Mark chapter 9, Matthew chapter 17, and Luke chapter 9, the gospel storyteller wants you to know that there were three witnesses to the Transfiguration, Peter and James and John, and they want you to see yourself as belonging to a story of which now you too can witness it, because you can see it in your own imagination. So the story is there to encourage you to imagine it, and once you imagine it, then you too become a witness to the story.
So we go out and tell the story then to the next people.
That's exactly it. That's what we mean by tradition.
Yeah.
Each storyteller adds it to the next storyteller, who adds it to the next.
Thank you very much, Tom. And so we're coming to the end of this interview, and I'm sure we'll have another interview some time when it's possible with you.
That'll be very nice.
Yeah. And if you want to hear more about Professor Tom O'Loughlin, please note also that he is currently presenting at an international online series on liturgy with the title, "Can You Send an Apple by Email?" His next online seminars will be on the 13th and the 20th of August at 7 p.m. New Zealand time. And you can book through cathnews.co.nz/Let's Talk Liturgy in one word. And I will also put this link up on my website so that you remember about this series. And we also have a series with Brother Kieran Fenn, who is a Bible scholar with more than 40 years experience in adult education. And he will present an online series on Mary, the Mother of God, a contemporary understanding of Mary. This series will start on the 24th of August and will then be on for 6 Monday evenings until the 28th of September. For more information about this event, please check out my website at www.studyjoy.org. And so thank you very much, Tom, for having been here. And I'm happy that we can continue every now and then. We'll have an interview on different topics on theology, on history, and with your broad knowledge, I think that we will never run out of topics.
I'm sure we never will. It's lovely to meet you again, even if we're not together in Auckland.
Thank you very much, and all the best, and greetings to the UK. I hope that you're fine there. Okay, thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.